Hi, my name is Kate Dittrich, and I am a labor and employment attorney that is going to present on diversity, equity, inclusion, and harassment prevention today. I hope you get a lot out of this seminar. It is slightly different from some of the diversity and inclusion courses you may have taken in the past. This is really focused on implicit bias and brain science, understanding how your brain works, the terminology that is used when we discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, and the standards of law that apply to both diversity, equity, inclusion, and issues of harassment prevention. Thank you for being here today, and I hope you enjoy the seminar. I want to start by talking about the reason why diversity, equity, and inclusion in anti-harassment training is so important. As an initial matter, it is something that customers are asking for. They want to see organizations that utilize diversity, equity, and inclusion training practices and harassment prevention practices, and organizations that really focus on general corporate social responsibility as a whole. So that's something that's really driving the need for the training. But most importantly, businesses can really benefit from this training because they get a diverse perspective from employees and everyone that comes in contact with the organization, which is really valuable for organizations. When people feel comfortable, when they are happy in their space, in their work environment, they work better, they're more productive. And so that's what we really want to focus on today, is making people feel comfortable and understanding how their brain works and the legalities that are related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. You might have been to a DEI training in the past, and a lot of the trainings focus on general concepts of respectfulness and considerateness and opposing discriminatory behavior. But it's extremely difficult to change the behaviors without an understanding of the pre-existing psychological tendencies and sociological tendencies and legalities that exist. So that's what we're really going to focus on today. The goal of the training is to provide education and really make people aware of the diversity, equity, inclusion, and harassment prevention issues. We're going to focus on terminology, what words mean, what people are using when they talk about these issues. We're going to talk about brain science, how your mind actually works, sociological and legislative history, and what the law really says and how it comes into play with best practices for an organization. And then we're going to create suggestions to diversify and become a more inclusive organization with strong harassment prevention practices. I want to start off with some terminology. The term diversity, a lot of people mistakenly use that as a synonym for minorities. So people might say, oh, we need to hire a diverse candidate, meaning we need to hire a minority candidate. And diversity really means the existence of variations and characteristics of different people. The characteristics are everything that makes you unique: your cognitive skills, your personality traits, along with the things that shape your identity, the community that you come from. And so diversity may mean different things to different groups. For example, if you have a workforce that is largely made up of white females, then diversity to you might mean bringing more males into that organization. It really just means having some sort of difference from the majority or from an individual person. Okay, so be cautious when you use the term diversity, and make sure you're not using it as a synonym for minority or bringing in women. The word inclusion is defined as the procedures that a person or entity implements to integrate everyone in a group or a workplace, allowing for their differences to coexist in a mutually beneficial way. This is, again, where we get to the notion of making people feel comfortable in their space, making people feel welcome, happy, where they want to come to work, they want to come to the organization. because they feel good about it and they feel comfortable. So that's what we're working on when we talk about inclusion. So these notions, diversity, equity, and inclusion principles, work in opposition to explicit and implicit biases and isms, racism, sexism, ageism. We're going to talk about those more throughout this seminar. The next bullet point there is bias. And when I say bias, a lot of people say, oh, no, I'm not biased, I'm not biased, equating the word with negativity. And what's important to understand is that bias isn't always negative. What bias means is a disproportionate weight in favor or against a person, idea, or thing. So sometimes bias can be great if you have bias in favor of something that is good and that will help your organization. So really understanding the biases that you have, the reasons why you have them, will help you in your work. Next word there is prejudice. And prejudice is really an unfair judgment of a person, idea, or thing, which might come from a bias that you have, an unconscious bias or an implicit bias. But it's when you take an idea and really impose it on someone else without any justification or without any merit to it. That's what prejudice is. Stereotype is an oversimplification and generalized belief about a particular category of people. So, for example, a notion that women aren't good drivers. That would be a stereotype and a prejudice as well. Someone may have experienced one woman who wasn't a good driver. If your mother, for example, wasn't a good driver, that may create an association or a bias in you that causes you to have a stereotype about all women. So what we're going to talk about here today is really individualizing people and recognizing that people are individuals, not just part of a group that can be labeled with a stereotypical label, okay? Harassment is unwelcome, intimidating, or offensive conduct. That's really the definition of harassment. But harassment is not necessarily unlawful unless it is based on a protected category. So the protected categories are the categories that the law says are protected. So Title VII of the Civil Rights Act says you are protected on the basis of your race, your gender, your national origin, your religion, your color. And so those are called protected categories. And the law says you cannot harass someone based on that. And then again, to be unlawful, it must be severe and pervasive harassment in order to be unlawful. This sets, and we're going to talk about the minimum standards of human behavior. That's what the law sets, is the minimum expectation of appropriate behavior in the workplace. But what is a best practice, and what your company does, is to set its policies above that. So your company prohibits harassment, even if it's not based on a protected category. So if someone is rude and offensive and mean and bullying in the workplace, even if it's not because of that person's race or gender or national origin, it is still prohibited by company policy, which we're going to talk about later on today. So where do these biases come from? Where do the prejudice and stereotypes come from? I'm going to talk about three concepts as to how these are formed, okay? And I'm going to drill down some of these in more detail. So the first concept is that human brains are programmed to make associations, shortcuts, as a survival mechanism to process information quickly. We're going to talk about this quite a bit, but the general notion is that every image you see, every statement you hear creates an association so that you can process information quickly in the future. So that's the first concept. The second concept is that most humans accept and support the social norms of the community where they were raised, giving rise to complacency. So this is the notion that you generally will have the same beliefs, political beliefs, religious beliefs, stereotypical beliefs that your parents have or that your grandparents have, because that's what you know. That's where you were born into. And so it takes a level of education and maturity to recognize that just because your parent said something doesn't mean it's true, or doesn't mean that it is an accurate or good belief or a sound belief. So that's something that we're going to work on throughout today, is really understanding things differently, looking at things from a different perspective, and understanding that not all things that you are used to or that you grew up believing may be accurate. The third concept is the notion that humans take comfort in categorization. You may have heard people say, well, I know how they are, or, this group is all like this. And it helps people to understand and to be able to conceptualize when they can place people in a category or give people context. So for example, personality indicator types do this. They put people kind of in a box, like the Myers-Briggs type indicator test will tell you, are you an introvert or an extrovert? Are you perceiving or judging? And those are extremely helpful tests to help understand why this person does what they do. So this person's an extrovert, which is why they want to socialize and they need to socialize or go out to events and to be around people because they're an extrovert and that's what gives them energy. So it's very helpful to understand people if you have categories to put them in, right? But the problem comes when you take that category and you spread it among a large group of people. So you may have, generally the personality indicators are great because they're only individual assessments. But the problem is if you say, okay, all extroverts behave like this, that's where you get into stereotypical views because you're placing people in a category and expecting certain behavior of everyone who's in that category. It's also helpful, one of the things that I've recognized is that when my child comes home from school for a new school year, this was just happened here in August. And one of my first questions to the child was, do you have any new friends in your class? Do you have any new kids in your class? And the child said, yes. And they said, yes, I have a friend named Winston and a friend named Rudy. And my first question was, is Rudy a boy or girl? Because my mind went to, I want to put Rudy in a category so that I can help understand where Rudy's coming from, if Rudy might be a good friend to my son or not. And that was my tendency, right? And I kind of caught myself and realized, hey, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe that's not the right question to ask a child about whether someone's a boy or a girl, because maybe that person is non-binary, which is a vocabulary term we're going to talk about later. But maybe that person doesn't identify as a boy or a girl. And maybe I need to teach my child that that's not a first initial measure of what they should be assessing. So be mindful of the fact that your brain tends to want to categorize people. And sometimes that may be helpful, but also sometimes that may cause stereotypes to develop. So the first kind of substantive topic we're going to talk about at length is unconscious or implicit bias. Some people distinguish those two terms. There's some slight nuance between those terms, but generally they're used interchangeably, unconscious or implicit, and they rest within all of us, okay? We all have biases. No matter what race you are, what color you are, what national origin you have unconscious bias based on associations made by your brain. So a lot of times, again, when I hear people or when people hear the word bias, they say, no, I'm not biased. I don't have any bias, but it is in your mind because that's the way your brain works. And we're going to talk about that next. So the human brain is programmed to make associations or impulsive reactions, and those keep you safe. That's the reason why they are there. It's a survival mechanism for when the brain doesn't have time to send a message to the body. So for example, when you were a child or a toddler, you learned that fire was hot. Your parent told you, or you actually felt it yourself, or you felt the heat of the fire, and you learned fire equals hot. You made that association. So now, if you're around fire, your brain doesn't have to take the time to send the message to your hand, pull the hand back, because the association has already been made. In that way, it's a survival mechanism that keeps you safe, because the association is present once you learn that initial connection between fire and heat. Even when it's not needed as a survival mechanism, your brain is still programmed to make associations. So every image you see and every word you hear creates an association. These help you work. They help you process information quickly. So all day long, you may think, dirty kid, go to bath, stocks high, sell the stock, not enough customers, lower the prices, things like that all day long, where there's some sort of input and there's an impulsive reaction, and there's an association that's made. And that's what helps you process information quickly and make decisions quickly, which is often needed in the busyness of our society. They are connections between a thing, a word, a visual, and a response, a feeling or a reaction. Some associations are positive and some associations are negative. For example, how quickly can you read the words on the following chart? So look at these words and just read them out loud or read them to yourself. Red, black, blue, green, yellow, red. Orange, blue, red, yellow, green, blue. Okay, just go down the list. Maybe see how fast you can do it. Take another loop through to see how quickly you can. Now take a look at the words on this chart and see how fast you can read them. Red, black, blue, green, yellow, red. Orange, blue, red, yellow, green, blue. Go on, maybe read it a couple times. See how fast you can do this one. Most people read the second chart a bit slower, okay? Why? Because you cannot associate the color with the word. Sometimes you can read it just as fast after your brain takes a second to adjust. You realize, okay, color doesn't match the word, so I have to just read the word. It's a little more difficult with the yellow words, I think, because they are, it just maybe you can't see it as well. And so you have to really say, okay, what are the letters there? But that teaches you how your brain is operating, where when you're reading the first chart, you can just look at the colors, right? You can go a lot faster. And then the second one, maybe you can go just as fast, but again, your brain usually takes a minute to adjust to do that. Since race, color of skin, national origin are often, not always, but often visual traits, or those that lend toward categorization, your brain automatically makes associations based on your experiences with individuals of different races or skin colors or from different countries. When you see an image like this, it creates a negative association with people of color. And when you see images like these, it creates a positive association with people of color. Consider your own opportunities for such positive associations. Think about where you grew up. Think about who you interacted with on a daily basis. Think about comments that your parents may have made about their interactions, or that your grandparents may have made about their interactions. If you grew up with your mother working in the home, if your mother did not work outside of the house, and you had never reported up to a female, you may not see females as leaders. You may have trouble reporting up to a female. Usually that's different for people who have older siblings, older sisters. If you have an older sister, you may be used to reporting up to a female, even if you've never done it in the workplace. I have a partner who is a male who's about 20 years older than I am. And we had a seminar that we were giving where various other partners were presenting, and he was tasked with responding to questions in the chat box in just one portion of the presentation. And when I saw a question come in and I knew that he was responsible for responding, my fingers immediately went to the keyboard to type an answer for him, thinking that he couldn't type. And he can type, but it was just an automatic impulse that I had because my dad can't really type. And I've seen several men in my office who couldn't type, who kind of pecked the keyboard, right? So because those associations were previously made, I had the impulse to go ahead and type for him. So think about that. Catch yourself when you realize, oh, that's not how things really are. Think about Hollywood. Every movie that was made from the initiation of Hollywood had an effect on its viewers, right? And the vast majority of movies in our history have a protagonist who is a white male. So that creates an association that protagonists, leaders, are white males. That is why you see such a drive to diversify Hollywood. If you watch the Oscars this year in 2021, you likely saw a large majority of speakers and attendants who are people of color and celebrating movies who are people of color. The purpose of that is to really change the dynamic and not have only an association with white males in the roles of protagonists or the roles as leaders. When your workplace and your social life and your media intake is not diverse, there's less opportunity to create positive associations based on race. So if you know only one person of color or another race than you or another culture than you, then likely you are going to associate that race or that color with however that other person behaves. But if you know several people who are of a different race than you, then your associations will be different. And you'll start to realize, oh, not all Caucasian people are the same, or not all Black people are the same. You need to experience that for yourself so that those different associations can be made. One thing I want to note is Harvard does an amazing implicit bias test that you can get online. The website's there on the screen to just look at what bias might exist that you don't recognize yet. They have various forms, tests for race and gender and color, sexual orientation, lots of different things that you can test and to see, okay, and it's a speed test essentially, where you have to associate a word with an image that you see. And it's very interesting to see, what might lie beneath your surface that you don't even recognize. So that's the first step too, is to really assess where you come from, what biases were created, whether or not they have merits, and whether or not they are actually lending towards stereotypes that shouldn't be there. I want to take a brief look at history and really assess where a lot of biases come from, just based on our nation's history. Here on the slide, it has the first time frame of 1619, and that's the date that most historians agree was the first slave ship that landed in the United States, to 1865, which was the end of the Civil War. That's 246 years of slavery. I was really blown away when I saw the history laid out like this to say, wow, only 56 years since the Civil Rights Act. Only 99 years of time frame between the end of the Civil War and when Title VII of the Civil Rights Act was enacted. So during that initial time frame, that 246 years of slavery, every person, Black, white, associated African Americans with being enslaved, because they were. The association was made that if you have brown skin, you can be enslaved, you can be chained, you can be beaten, you can be raped, and you are property. That was what occurred for 246 years of our nation's history, that in every person, the association was created, brown skin equals slavery. The next time frame is following the Civil War. And after the Civil War, the 13th Amendment was written. And it was written to read the exact quote, the amendment itself is quoted here on the slide. It says, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." So they carve out an exception. You can be a slave if you're a criminal. So what happened in our nation at that time? The economy of the South started to tank because slaves were freed and no longer working in the fields. So since there was an exception to the 13th Amendment that said you can be enslaved if you are convicted of a crime, the arrest and conviction rates of African Americans skyrocketed, so that they could go back to working in the fields and increase the economy of the South. The association changed. Previously to the end of the Civil War, for 246 years, the association was African American equals enslaved. After the 13th Amendment was written, the association changed to African American equals criminal. And the reason for that was because there were so many African Americans who were arrested and convicted of crimes like loitering or vagrancy. Not because they were committing crimes at a greater rate than Caucasians, but because government officials decided they needed to increase the economy of the South and have more criminals who could work in the fields. There is a Netflix documentary called 13th that talks about this in greater detail. I would highly recommend watching that. It really shows a good and accurate history of what happened following the Civil War and how biases and associations were made. One of the facts from that show, and that I've double checked in some other resources, is that the United States contains 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. So those disproportionate facts show how increased arrests and convictions are in the United States as opposed to everywhere else in the world. The current EEOC, that's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has issued a lot of guidance and counseling and said that it is unlawful to base hiring decisions on arrest records, because historically minorities have been arrested at much higher rates than Caucasians. There is no federal rule of law that expands that to convictions, even though statistics show that minorities are also convicted at higher rates than Caucasians. But there are several rules in different localities that say you should not consider a conviction or arrest until after a job offer is made. So that is a best practice to do, really assess, is this individual the best one for the role? Do they have the right qualifications, the right skills, the right personality to do this job? And if so, then you can do a background check and assess, okay, is there a conviction that really would sway you in a different way? So what's the resolution to implicit bias? The first step is awareness. Really sitting here listening is the first thing that you can do to understand how your mind works, what already exists there, and then that can help you overcome it. The second thing is to slow down. Implicit bias and unconscious bias take hold when you make quick snap decisions, because that's why it's there. That's why those associations are created, to enable you to make those quick snap decisions. But when you slow down and you say, okay, say you have an open position that you need to hire for, you say, okay, rather than just thinking, oh, I know who's the right person for the job, slow it down. Articulate everything you need for the role. What are you looking for in a candidate? Then post the job, do interviews, review resumes, review performance evaluations if you're hiring internally. You really want to slow the process down, even though it takes more time, takes more administrative burden. It will get you where you need to be to help overcome any biases that may be pre-existing in your mind. Force yourself to consider individuals rather than groups. And then diversify your own environment to seek positive associations with people of different races, different color, different cultures. One of the things a lot of people, when they talk about diversity and inclusion, they talk about, okay, I want to bring people of different races, different colors, different national origins to my world, which may be good because then the organization gets different perspectives, and that certainly is something that is good to do. But to change your own associations, bringing someone into your environment isn't going to help you. What you need to do is to put yourself in a different environment. So if you are a churchgoer, maybe try going to church in a different part of town with people that are predominantly different color than you or different culture than you. A good way to do that too is to watch movies with protagonists that are of a different race or female or different from yourself in some way. Or watch documentaries or other things that are about people of different cultures or different races. Read different magazines. Pick up a book from an author who is a person of a different race than you are. That in that way, you can really start making different associations than you already have. It is interesting too. Sometimes I'll be reading a book and not look at who the author is initially. And in my mind, I'll think, wow, this must, I'll hear the voice of a woman or think, wow, this has really captured a female perspective. And then I'll look and see, oh, it was a man who wrote the book. So it's really interesting to do that too. Try to pick up books that maybe you don't even know who the author is and not let it matter who the author is also. Educate yourself about diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, okay? So Netflix has that great documentary called The 13th. It also has another one called 100 People, which is a psychological study on different things, like including implicit bias, that are really good to watch. But there are a lot of resources that are available to anyone who wants them, just by Google searching or looking where you can, to try to educate yourself as much as possible. I want to talk now briefly about how the law interacts with diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. We have fair employment laws, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, fair housing laws, fair lending laws, and those are written to say you cannot discriminate or treat people differently because of their race, their national origin, their color, their religion, their gender. The law was not written to say you cannot treat minorities differently or you cannot treat women differently. So the law essentially protects the white male just as much as it protects a Black female. A lot of times people say, oh, that person's in a protected class. Well, everyone's in a protected class under the law. Protected class just means that you're protected on the basis of your race, no matter which race you are, or you're protected on the basis of your gender, no matter which gender you are. So in some instances, this creates a dilemma where steps toward equalization may be unlawful. For example, if you were to say, We know that African Americans have historically not been granted the privileges in housing that Caucasian individuals have. And so we are going to provide rent at half the price for African Americans versus Caucasian. That would be unlawful. Okay, that would be a violation of the fair housing laws. So in some instances, when you're trying to get people on equal playing field, our hands are tied by the law. Some organizations choose to do it anyway, which may be a choice, but something that the organization has to decide. But really true change may require some amendments to legislation. So that's something, if you're interested and really want to make a difference, I would recommend looking into that to see if there is possible changes in legislation that would allow for increased support or increased promotional opportunities because of someone's race or because of someone's gender, where affirmative action efforts may be allowed instead of actually impeded by the law. The fair employment, fair housing, fair lending laws work toward equality, right? They say everyone needs to be treated the same, which would have been great if everyone already was on level playing field, right? But for groups that were historically oppressed or marginalized, it's difficult to get them on the same playing field if you have to treat everyone the same. So we want to work on notions of equity rather than notions of equality. Equity is really dealing with fairness and equal opportunity. How do you put someone on an equal playing field when they're disadvantaged to start with? So this slide gives an example of that. If someone's all treated equally, someone's still at a disadvantage, right? Someone may need a step up in order to be put on an equal playing field with everyone else. This law this is really what's focused on with the Americans with Disabilities Act. That is the one law that says you have to accommodate individuals with disabilities in order to put them on equal playing field, okay? And this is what we're talking about there, by giving someone a step up, giving someone access that they may not already have so that they can then be on equal playing field with the rest of the group. We're going to talk a little bit more about the harassment components of Title VII, because Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, although it impedes some components of diversity and inclusion, it does provide a lot of protections that are very valuable to workers in this country. So here I have a list of the protected categories. So again, a lot of times people say they're in a protected category. Everyone's in a protected category, okay? The categories are race, national origin, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, disability, marital status, and veteran status. So no matter what side of the coin you're on these various things, you are protected under the various laws, including the Civil Rights Act, the Age Discrimination Employment Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. The federal law, actually the Age Discrimination Employment Act is like the Americans with Disabilities Act in that it only protects if you are 40 and above. Same with the Americans with Disabilities Act, it protects individuals with disabilities rather than protecting both sides of the fence on that one. So the factors of harassment, we're going to talk about what harassment is and what it means and what someone would have to prove in order to show that they have been harassed. Again, when we're talking about this right now, we're talking about the lowest standard of acceptable behavior, okay, by the law. So I want you to keep in mind as we go throughout this that your organization's policies are stronger than this, okay? So there's two different types of harassment. One's called quid pro quo. That means this for that. That's when a manager may ask for some sort of sexual favor in exchange for a job benefit or detriment, okay? Thankfully, we don't see cases like that as often because people know that they cannot do that. What's much more common is a hostile work environment claim. And a hostile work environment claim is one where the conduct is unwelcome. The person does not want to be engaging in it. Now, sometimes people do things that they don't want to do. So you can't always tell if it's welcome or not welcome. Okay. So for example, a subordinate may be driving to the hotel to have an affair with their boss. They're doing that because they think they have to, but not because they want to. So they could still show that the conduct was unwelcome, even if they are doing it. Okay. Even if there's no force or involuntary nature to it. So for that reason, that's why we say don't date your subordinates, because you never know if the person is truly dating you because they want to or because they feel they have to. If you are in a situation, however, where you fall in love with your coworker and that person is your soulmate, that does happen. You need to watch for signs that the conduct is welcome, okay, that the affection is reciprocated. So you may ask that person out, and if they say no, then you end and don't ask again. If that person says, yes, I would love to go out with you and let's do this and let's plan this and shows interest, that's an indication that the conduct is welcome. And then if a relationship does develop, you would need to report that to human resources to make sure that there is no problem with having an undue influence over the individual that you're in a relationship with. The conduct needs to be severe and pervasive. This, again, is an area where in order to be unlawful, it has to be severe and pervasive, but it may be against the company's policies, even if it's not, even if it's a one-time incident. It has to cause an unreasonable interference with the employee's job, and it has to be one that the victim thinks it's offensive and an ordinary person would think it was offensive to alter the work environment. Who can be the harasser? A lot of times people just think of managers, but it could be a manager, it could be a customer, it could be a coworker, it could be a vendor. The company has an obligation to protect its employees from anyone they interact with in the workplace. So if you have a vendor who's coming in who is changing air filters and continues to harass one of the employees, absolutely report that to make sure that it can be handled. And the way that it's handled is to either talk to the, well, first to talk to the vendor to say your conduct is not welcome and needs to stop. And if it doesn't stop, then you contact the manager of the vendor and say, we need to cancel our contract because of the behavior of your individual. The law holds that you as the employer are obligated to do that. So your job as an employee of the organization is to make sure that it gets reported so that it can be addressed. There's no bright line rule as to what conduct constitutes harassment. So there's nothing that says, okay, if you do X, Y, and Z, that's going to be unlawful. Now, there are different cases that there's a whole body of case law where the judges and juries have assessed, okay, we think this type of conduct is going to be unlawful. And so in each instance, you would compare it to prior cases to say, oh, this is worse, or this is better, or this is just as bad, to determine whether or not, in your case, the situation rises to the level of unlawfulness. So because there is no clear, bright line, we want to stay as far away from the line as possible. Nothing that would even cause someone to say, oh, I feel harassed. I feel treated unfairly. I feel treated offensively. Because that is really where we get to a breaking point of someone making a claim, bringing a charge. And then the jury or a judge would assess, okay, yes, we are ordinary people and an ordinary person would think that that conduct rises to the level of harassment. But again, you want to be so far away from that you don't have to even think about having to address it. Again, the company's policies prohibit conduct that does not necessarily rise to the level of unlawfulness for that reason. And because we want to make sure that everyone has a comfortable and safe work environment where they feel good. So if you're facing harassment, and I should modify the slide to say not just facing harassment, but witnessing it or experiencing it yourself. If either one of those is the case, you want to first inform the perpetrator that the conduct is not welcome. So tell that person, That's not, hey, that's not okay. Can you stop doing that? That really makes me feel uncomfortable. Something along those lines. If you are not comfortable doing that, report it. Make sure that it goes to the attention of human resources. And even if you're not sure, okay, so there may be circumstances where you're unsure about something is actually discriminatory or actually harassment, report it anyway. Err on the side of caution to say, hey, this just doesn't feel right. That way it can be addressed, it can be remedied before it becomes a problem. So the company's obligations, after the company receives a report, any manager receives a report or human resources receives a report, the company has the obligation to investigate, okay? A lot of times people try to say, well, I don't want anything to happen, or I just want you, manager, to know that this is going on, but I don't want that person to get in trouble, or I don't want anything to happen, and I want to keep this confidential, so please don't tell anybody about this. Well, under the law, in order to avoid perpetuating problems or allowing problems to continue, the company cannot do that. The company cannot keep it confidential, and does have to disclose the issue to the extent necessary in order to investigate it. Okay, so to dig into what's going on, talk to the alleged perpetrator, and talk to the alleged victims, and then to take remedy. So if there is an issue, the company's job is to resolve it, which sometimes may be termination, sometimes may be a transfer, sometimes may be required counseling. Any number of things can serve as a remedy, increased training. So just because if you report something and the manager's still there, the person who was harassing you is still coming to work, don't jump to the conclusion that nothing was done, because there may be something done that you don't see. That person has to go through additional training or go through some counseling, depending on the circumstances. The company's next obligation is anti-retaliation obligation, and your company does have strong anti-retaliation rules that if anyone reports an issue in good faith, that the company will not retaliate against the individual for doing that. So if you feel retaliated against, that's where you go back to the drawing board and report that issue, so that can likewise be addressed and investigated. And then you want to refocus on diversity and inclusion efforts to say, okay, there is an issue, something arose, we looked into it, we remedied it, we did not retaliate, and now we're going to work toward diversification and inclusion to, again, really focus on making people feel good and comfortable in their work environment. True inclusion requires an understanding of how people identify. So your identity is your physical, psychological, interpersonal characteristics with which you associate. And this is really where terminology becomes important. I hear a lot of people say, well, I can't keep up. The political correctness, it's too much. It's too difficult, exhausting, or overwhelming. But really, if you focus on it for a small amount of time, if you really just pay attention for a little bit, even in the seminar, if you just listen to the seminar, the little bit of effort to help understand and help be aware of the terminology and the issues will go a very, very long way. And we want to make sure that using an individual's preferred terminology, so preferred pronouns, really shows respect and makes others feel welcome and feel comfortable in their work environment, which then makes everyone better workers and more productive and a happy organization. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of that terminology, and then we'll wrap up for the day. So accessibility, this is a term generally instead of disability or instead of a handicapped parking spot. The most appreciated term now is an accessible parking spot. And accessibility means creating workspaces and public spaces that can be reached and used by people of all types of abilities, including those with disabilities. Neurodiverse is another bullet point there, that is the recognition of neurological differences. So a lot of times folks with autism or Asperger's really is just a difference in the way that their brain functions and that their brain operates. And so a lot of people prefer the term neurodiverse rather than the label of the actual impairment that goes with it. Gender identity, this is the big one that a lot of people are talking about. You've probably seen a lot of this lately, which is the preferred pronouns that someone likes to use to identify the either gender or non-binary nature with one identifies. So this is not the same as sexual orientation. This is not who you are attracted to. This involves how you classify yourself and how you recognize yourself. So you could be identified as male or female or non-binary, which means not identifying as either male or female. So this is, again, where we get into, asking your child, oh, is your new friend a boy or a girl? May create in the child's head an association that it has to be a boy or a girl and that there's no other option. Well, there is another option, which is the non-binary option. LGBTQ is the acronym probably most people have heard of that stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer. And that term, like others too on here, if you're not quite sure, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to be transgender versus bisexual? Transgender really focuses on your body and how you identify outwardly to others, which can involve a difference in appearance or actual surgery to change your body. And so that is something too, that if you have difficulty understanding or aren't quite sure what the words mean, simply Google it. There's information that's available that can give you lots of answers if you're seeking that. And then the last one here is BIPOC, which I heard one of my partners actually saying a few months ago, and I had to slow her down and say, what are you saying? What's that word that you're saying? Which stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. So simply by understanding the terminology, respecting the terminology, and respecting someone's wishes of how they want to be referred is highly advised. I will tell you that I am a grammar nerd. And so when the first person ever told me that they wanted to be referred to as they, it actually happened to be in a context where I was drafting a contract with that person, a contract for employment. And so I'm drafting the contract and I'm hemming and hawing and saying, oh gosh, this doesn't read right because I'm referring to the person as they, and it makes it look like there's more than one worker, that there's more than one employee because it's plural. And, I'm getting all worked up about it and then realize, oh, instead of using pronoun, I'm just going to use the individual's name. And it's not a big deal, right? And I can get over the fact that I'm a grammar nerd and that the grammar is just different because that's how we have progressed as a society to use that term, they, them, and theirs, as a non-binary term to identify someone who doesn't associate with either male or female. So the extent you can learn the words that people are using, you can respect the words that people are using and the pronouns that people want, that will help create an inclusive environment and help automatically prevent harassment from occurring because you're showing respect and you're showing non-offensive behavior to someone else. Thank you for coming, for listening. I hope you learned something from this seminar. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have, and I appreciate your time.